and South Korea's Trade Minister Andokan is coming to the US to ask the Trump administration to waive tariffs on certain goods. It's not just Canada, Mexico, and China that Trump's taxes affect. The whole world is affected by this storm. Need an honest answer about the European Union? Or would you like a political answer? Of course, of course. We've been treated so badly by the European Union. Trump made it clear this week that he will put more tariffs on the European Union. He is now putting the same tariffs on all of his friends in the Asia-Pacific region. Trade ties between the US and South Korea and Japan are especially strong. Japan has had a different view of Trump's taxes than the rest of the world. Japan wants both sides to raise their tariffs. However, South Korea doesn't seem to agree with this idea. South Korea is doing something to keep its steel and car exports from taking a big hit. Does South Korea want to beg Washington for help, or will it pick Canada or one of its Asian allies instead? According to news stories and urgent talks between ministers, South Korea is doing almost everything it can to avoid the tariff. But rising trade in oil and steel with Canada makes a new North American-Asian axis more likely. How will the South Korean minister, who almost went to Washington to ask for lower tariffs, try to meet President Trump's needs? He wants to get steel and other goods free from the 25% tariffs. The fact that his Seoul is working with Canada on more metals and energy projects is a subtle way of telling the US, look, we have other options. What effect will all of these changes have on the Korean economy? And will these attacks on the US really work? Because of a big trade gap between the US and South Korea last year, the Trump administration often brought up the ideas of putting tariffs on South Korean goods. The most common things that were brought up were steel, cars, and consumer gadgets. For South Korean businesses, this was the worst thing that could have happened, because a lot of their trade goes to the US. When you add in the European market, you get almost half of Seoul's trade with other countries. Any rise in tariffs could make the South Korean economy shake on such an important problem. So, how did this fight begin? The people in charge say that there is no one side to this. A big part of the US business has been taken over by South Korea. In recent years, thanks to its high-tech goods and advanced technology. President Trump said, our manufacturers are at a disadvantage compared to their Korean competitors. To close the trade gap, he put tariffs in place. The Trump administration hasn't been afraid of trade disputes, even with neighbors like Canada and Mexico. In the same way, they wanted to bring Korea to the table. The Koreans were shocked because they had been mostly safe thanks to the United States Korea Free Trade Agreement, FTA. They said, we did not expect this. It could have been political pressure. They weren't used to it. Some big South Korean companies acted right away in the steel and car industries. Some people talked about plans to build more factories in the US, while others said that we would pay for higher taxes if we had to. But it's clear that what they really want is tax breaks and to get out of this mess with as little damage as possible. So, it shouldn't have been a surprise that South Korea's trade minister went to Washington to meet with Trump's government. But behind these visits, the news stories make it seem like South Korea is pleading for tariffs, which gives the image of, please give us a break. Do you believe this to be too much, or does Seoul really need help that badly? The main reason for all of this work is easy to understand. South Korea desperately wants to be free from the steel and aluminum tariffs that the US puts on goods it imports. These people have already gotten a small break in the past, but now they want more. The main reason for this is that a lot of Korea's steel giants' products are sent to the US. Rather than leaving the US market, these big companies are working hard to keep their presence there. It's interesting that Korea's political unrest has also led businesses to say, if the ministry isn't enough, let's lobby in person. Korea's biggest companies seem to be more interested in the question of how much more power the government has when there is political instability. Now is when the Canadian part comes into play. South Korea and Canada have worked together diplomatically and economically for a long time. These days, people who work with energy and metals are getting closer together. South Korea has other ways to get supplies, and Canada's large oil reserves are one of them. In the same way, Korean steelmakers could use Canada to get into the North American market. This could be a way to escape some of the tariffs that the US puts on goods. When Korea trades more oil and steel with Canada, it makes you wonder if it's trying to get around the US. Of course, diplomatic sources have not yet confirmed these reports, but working together between Canada and Korea could be a fun way to start the new era of global trade. In the US, different points of view are being heard. We all know that things are bad in North Korea. South Korea has always needed armed help from the United States. Because of this, it is not possible to break up with the Washington government because of trade disputes. They can't really say, we will retaliate, because their market isn't big enough to fight back against the American economy. Seoul's most important cards right now are diplomacy and pressure. This worsening is also causing a lot of trouble in Korean politics at home. The opposition says that the government should make new business deals with other countries to become less reliant on the US. The government says, we can't break away from the United States. We will peacefully weather this storm. In the business world, people are impatient and want to find a tax answer as soon as possible. Some companies told the press, we don't trust the government on this, which is true. Our own lobbying teams are helping us work out deals with the US government. This is why the news that businesses are tackling the price problem on their own has become so popular. What does it really mean that trade in oil and steel with Canada is growing? To put it another way, Korea relied a lot on the Middle East for oil and goods made from it, but energy markets around the world are looking for other sources of supply. It is second only to the United States in terms of oil stocks. Korea may be looking to the Canadian market to get goods from more places in the Middle East, and to make itself stronger in case the US puts pressure on it. In the same way, Canada is trying to stay a little more independent in the face of Trump's trade moves. A lot of trade goes back and forth between the US and Canada, but Ottawa can keep from being too dependent on a single market by working with more countries, like Korea. It's the same in the steel business. China and South Korea may be looking for ways to get into North America through Canada. From a trade point of view, this equation is actually very hard to understand, because steel taxes have caused problems between the US and Canada. Canada, on the other hand, is more willing to talk than the US, and wants to protect the idea of free trade. Korean makers are wondering if there is a way to get to the US through Canada because of this attitude. There are, of course, a lot of law and administrative problems, but there are also a lot of creative ways to solve them. The more important thing is how the US responds. Washington is keeping a close eye on the trade of oil and steel between Canada and Korea. Is the fact that Canada is so close to Korea a sign to me? One might believe. Of course, it's easy to picture the Canadian government saying, we're only thinking about what's best for our own country. We aren't calling anyone out, but if we look at how the Trump team handles trade, we can see that they are growing. In this light, could the United States see Canada's criticism of Korea as an attempt to hurt the US? Part of this complicated picture could also be a wave of tariffs around the world. Trade deals with China, the EU, Canada, and Mexico are being looked over by the Trump government. Under the slogan, Making America Great Again, the president wants to turn high tariffs on imported goods against the growth of the U.S. industrial sector. But this plan has made world trade more tense, which is starting a chain reaction. When it comes to this, South Korea is one of the countries that is most afraid of the US and may have to give up the most. If things go badly with Canada, Seoul might start to wonder, should we open other doors as a plan B? They want to know, who is the winner in this? Most of the time, the answer is no one, because trade barriers that work both ways hurt global competition, drive up prices, punish customers, and end up being bad for everyone in the long run. Because of this, Korea's efforts to get the US to waive the rules are seen as a major political move to avoid a trade war. There may be more chances for the US in the Korean market if a last-minute deal is made. Korean producers will be happy about this. But what if this middle ground can't be found? Then Korea might not be able to get into the US market as much, even if it makes new trade lines through Canada. This would really hurt the Korean economy, make unemployment worse, and mess up plans to spend. Large companies like electronics giant Samsung and car giant Hyundai have a big share of the US market. This means that the future of these companies would also be in danger. There are even Korean commentators who are telling the government to make even more concessions but keep the connection. That is, the United States is the most important industry. You would be killing yourself to leave it. From a political point of view, North Korea has been a problem for Korea's often changing leaders. There are times when diplomacy is needed, times when sanctions are needed, and times when efforts are made to get more American help.